You are now tuned in to The Local Lens, the podcast where we go inside our community's experience with the drug epidemic. And here's where we're going to be starting this episode at. We have this group of people that is going into different jails and interviewing some of the inmates, trying to find out what their biggest needs are. What were the most common things you were hearing in these interviews with people?
Overwhelmingly, they felt like they were sitting in the detention centers and that nothing was offered to them. And keep in mind, the majority of these interviews were pre-pandemic. So a few of them happened during the height of COVID, but the majority of them were conducted pre-pandemic. So we actually got to go in and sit across the table from these people and really have like one-on-one great conversations with them. And they just felt like they were sitting there with no resources, especially county inmates. That state inmates were being offered like SAP programs, but that county inmates weren't being offered anything. Heard a lot of women say that men were offered things that they weren't offered. And then post-release, they were really concerned with housing, employment. A couple of people said that they wanted to go straight to treatment and they didn't know how to advocate for themselves in that respect either. Just basically they didn't even know where to start. And like Brittany mentioned, can't get a job without an ID, can't get an ID without a birth certificate, and it's just all these really complicated processes that they didn't know how to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was just that they were being reincarcerated for the same crime, but then not having like anything, so they would be incarcerated, sit in there all this time, and be released with nothing in between.
Now, this sounds pretty harsh, but what do the people that work in the jails have to say about this subject? Now, to answer that, we have this clip from our previous episode with David Howard at the Powell County Detention Center.
I'm David Howard. I am the program director here at the Powell County Detention Center for the DOC Substance Abuse Program.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it almost seems like the jail is just like a bucket. People end up getting dumped in here, and you're like, well, this is the best we can do here right now. And is that how it feels on your own?
That's how a lot of it is.
Yeah.
I think that's been that way. I worked in jails as like Neil did, but before I did this, when I was in college and stuff, and it's always just seemed to be that way.
Yeah.
When people didn't know what else to do with somebody, I'm not saying they didn't deserve to do something to be brought to jail, but then they just got left there.
Yeah.
And there was no help for,
I've heard a lot of people say that it feels like a revolving door type of issue.
Oh, it is.
So you guys, you're both nodding along with that.
Yeah.
Well, even in substance abuse, I see the same guys I started with, unfortunately, a lot of them. And then even, I'm not even from this area, but a lot of the guys, when I hear them processing new guys in, I'm like, who'd they bring? And you know them because it just seems to be the same guys over and over again. Because a lot of the problems, whether substance abuse, mental health, hasn't been addressed. It kind of stinks that sometimes guys come to you and realize they need some help, and it's really not out there, especially for the mental health. And the best we can tell them is, hey, it's not we don't care, but we don't want to do any harm either, trying to go outside of where we should be.
Yeah.
Well, and so we would just say, hey, upon your release, we think it'd be appropriate to try to get, some kind of evaluation or something.
And this leads us to our episode for today. Now, there are so many problems, issues, and constraints that the jail has to deal with. And if you want to hear more about those specifically for this jail, then I encourage you to go back and listen to our previous week's episode. But this week, we are going to be looking specifically at reentry and what is happening when people are leaving jail and getting ready to get back into their lives. We are specifically going to be looking into the First Day Forward project, which is coming to the Northeastern Kentucky region, including Powell County. And we will also be going over some of the reasons why reentry is difficult in the first place. Well, you're tuned into The Local Lens, the podcast from the Powell County Health Department and Kentucky REO. These are our people using our voices, telling our stories, because no one sees it like we do. Now let's go on and meet our three guests for this episode. We have
Brittany Herrington, the program coordinator for First Day Forward.
Okay.
My name's KaSandra Henshaw. I'm actually the project director on 3 of our grants and project director over the First Day Forward.
And I'm Kaleigh Hemminger. I direct the Northeast Kentucky Substance Use Response Coalition.
And this Northeast Kentucky Substance Use Response Coalition is a pretty large group. So before anything else, Kaleigh is going to fully introduce us to that coalition.
Northeastern Kentucky, we all know, has been plagued by addiction and substance abuse for years. So in an attempt to combat that, the Northeast Kentucky Substance Use Response Coalition was formed in 2018. And we really got together wanting to explore substance use disorder, but particularly opioid use disorder, addiction, treatment options, and just the recovery lifestyle, all within an 18-county service region. Our service region includes Bath, Carter, Clark, Elliott, Fleming, Greenup, Lawrence, Lewis, Magoffin, Mason, Menifee, Montgomery, Morgan, Nicholas, Powell, Robertson, Round, and Wolfe counties. So our coalition really has the overall goal of creating and putting into place educational, clinical, and preventative interventions that directly impact the opioid and substance use crisis within Northeastern Kentucky. And by organizing our 8 community partners to work together instead of functioning in silos like we were before, we have allowed for better coordination of services and really just work to reduce any duplication of effort. Our coalition members represent multiple sectors and include St. Clair Healthcare and its hosted Northeast Kentucky Area Health Education Center, Achieving Recovery Together, the Clark County Health Department, Comprehend Inc., Pathways Inc., Tri-State Primary Care, the Kentucky Rural Healthcare Information Organization, and the Gateway District Health Department.
So to put all this briefly, this is a group of people that is joining forces to direct all the money and effort in an efficient way.
But we have brought more than $4.4 million worth of funding into our service region, which has really enabled us to facilitate meaningful projects and gather data and establish much needed interventions within our local communities.
And one of these interventions, as you have heard by now, is dealing with reentry, and that is the First Day Forward project.
First Day Forward really came to be, it was the brainchild of our coalition. We did interviews with inmates as a part of a planning grant that we had. And in those interviews, we all kind of found a passion for this reentry work. What we found is that incarcerated individuals, especially those who have a substance use disorder, are sitting in local detention centers with little to no resources being given to them. And in these interviews, we also found that they were all kind of nervous for what their life was going to look like when they were released. They didn't want to go back to their old ways, if you will, but they didn't know how that they were going to make a different life for themselves. And so we got together our coalition and we had a big whiteboard and we had this flow chart going of how we wanted this program to look. And what we decided was if we could offer these people education while they were still incarcerated, but then also a warm handoff to different resources post-release, then we could set them up for a better First Day Forward.
Yeah, but it actually, even going back before then, Kaleigh, a girl at the table was like, why don't we just rent a room next to the jail, and when people get out, we'll just give them a pair of shoes, a toothbrush, toothpaste, and some hygiene stuff, because these people were often leaving without basics, right? And everybody was like, yes, that's a great idea. And we hear that in these interviews. We've heard personal statements from other people who've been released with virtually nothing. So they were like, okay, we'll get a closet that has seasonal clothes from all seasons, because some people go in June and get out in December, so we'll provide them with an outfit when they leave. And then from that, just from the infancy of that idea, we were like, but there's so much more they need. They're getting out, so we give them a pair of shoes, but they don't have a driver's license to get a job. Yeah, they have a toothbrush and some toothpaste, but they don't have a birth certificate to get a driver's license. So I think it springboarded into everything that we do today.
Yeah, I was going to say we really started from like a blank whiteboard and we knew that we wanted to help people, and then we just kind of webbed it out of what all types of resources that we saw there was a need. And that's how we kind of developed First Day Forward and kind of lined out what needed to be done, the resources that they needed, where they need to be connected to, and kind of just the missing links to get people connected for success.
We talked to inmates in a couple different detention centers, but we also talked to the jailers of those detention centers. And for some of us who had little to no experience with the justice system, this was all very enlightening. But one jailer said that this really is a revolving door system. So, you have these people who are in for drug-related charges, and then they get out, and, well, who do they call? Well, they have to call somebody to come pick them up. So they're calling somebody who they used to use with, or they're calling their dealer, or they're calling somebody from that past life that they maybe necessarily don't want to be connected to anymore, but they don't have anybody else to call. So we just came up with the plan of how can we break that cycle to shut down that revolving door and offer these people a different outlook.
So as you can tell, this is a problem that has several layers, and it contributes in a big way to people getting stuck in this cycle of addiction.
Before we get into anything else, can we tell you a little bit about what First Day Forward is?
Yes,
I mean, we
please.
kind of told you how it was born and then where it's going, but you might not know what the baby looks like.
Yeah, please.
Right?
Yeah.
But First Day Forward, like Kaleigh and KaSandra said, just started with people just shooting ideas like darts onto a whiteboard, and then nixing out what we thought we were capable of doing, what we thought would create the biggest impacts, what we thought would be low cost, big impact, high cost, minimal impact, and just putting. And we spent really days, weeks in emails just really drafting this. And what it looks like today is we decided to use peer supports as our advocates and to create wingmans for our people reentering society. And the reason we did that is because I'm a person in recovery myself, and I know that distrust is huge in systems when you're navigating this process. I didn't have trust in jail staff. I didn't have trust in court systems. I didn't have trust in my local DMV. And that's not because they did anything to me personally. It's because, trust has never been built. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not relationships that you value and that you trust.
And we will be hitting a little bit closer on this building trust component with peer support specialists later on.
So First Day Forward starts with a screening, and this screening just tells us whether the person lives in the county that we're serving, whether they are there on state charges or misdemeanor charges, and whether they self-identify as having a substance use disorder, and most importantly, if they're even willing, because we only want people that are willing to change, willing to put the work in. So those are our qualifiers. If they meet that, they're a candidate for First Day Forward. So once we've established that they're a First Day Forward candidate, the peer support meets with them in the jail 30, 60, maybe even 90 days pre-release.
Okay.
And does an assessment of needs. So what do they need when they get out? We want the process of reentry to start the day they meet the peer support. We want their brains working for, what do I want my life to look at? What do I have to navigate? What kind of challenges will I have? We want that thought process to happen, because let's be real, reentry should start the date incarceration begins.
That's what I was about to say. Is
really, 100%.
That's when it should be starting.
Should.
But yeah.
Should. Corrections is the biggest lie any local, state, and federal government will tell you, because there's nothing corrected, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's probably controversial.
Sorry.
So we wanted to correct some things the best we could. Yeah. And first, you can't correct nothing if the person you're trying to help correct their lives doesn't trust.
Yeah.
Right? So that peer support does the needs assessment, does an orientation to what First Day Forward is going to look like, provides them education. So we have a workbook that covers everything from criminal thinking to anger, to codependency, getting employment, and gives them that workbook, and then case plans. So from the day they meet, they're planning for reentry, and we write that out plan by plan. What are we going to do the day you get out? What are we doing the week you get out? What are we doing the month you get out? That's carbon copied, so they get a copy. Peer support gets a copy.
Okay.
That peer support meets them in individuals and groups weekly until they're released. And then the magic of First Day Forward happens the day they get out. One of the most powerful stories that we heard during jail interviews was that people were getting picked up by old acquaintances, and we wanted to stop that cycle as well.
Okay.
So instead of being picked up by baby mama or Lil J or whoever, they're being picked up by the peer support. And we want life to stop. I know that every time I was released from incarceration, I just wanted to run as quick as I can to whatever was familiar to me, away from here to whatever was comfortable, which was never good.
Yeah.
And we want that panic to stop. So the peer supports picks them up from jail and takes them to a neutral place, whether that's a coffee shop, a park, McDonald's, and says, all right, new case plan. We've got this we made 90 days ago, and it could look identical, but we've got to know each other a lot. We have this needs assessment. What are we doing today to make your life better? What are we doing this week?
Yeah.
What are we doing this month?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and all our consumers are provided with a $50 Walmart gift card.
Okay.
So that peer takes them to Walmart or whatever local provider we worked with to get their basic needs met. So to get that hygiene, to get a pair of shoes if they need it or an outfit if they need it.
That's what Brittany touched on. That I'd like to make a little bit more clear. What we found was with this revolving door, if you are arrested, and I didn't know this, but if you are arrested in July and you're wearing a tank top and shorts and flip-flops and you get released in December, you're getting released in that same tank top, shorts, and flip-flops.
If they still exist. If
Yeah.
they haven't been lost in the jail somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like, you don't even have shoes. Like, if you got arrested and you didn't have shoes on, you're getting released with no shoes. And then on top of that, we, whenever we were having our big whiteboard planning session, we talked about, how to make these people feel like people again. And we talked about, like, just being able to go to Walmart and get your favorite shampoo and conditioner and body wash could be the start of something great. So just being able to meet those basic needs, like, right out the gate.
So, I don't feel like myself if I'm not wearing, like, the green speed stick.
Right.
Like, I feel foreign, like, not
Sure.
in my own skin at that point. So, no, that makes sense.
And what we don't see happening and what you can't detail in an outline or a book, you can't plan for this, but during these trips, during these meetings, during these really intimate discussion and the sharing of pain and struggle between the peer support and the inmate, trust is being built.
Yeah.
Trust in a system, trust in many systems, and that's all bridged with that peer support.
How essential is a somebody that just has that experience in these situations?
Essential or critical?
Critical.
To me,
yeah.
it's critical, and I have lived experience, and that's really all I can speak of. And then I've worked in this field for the last 10 years. It's the bridge gap. It's the gap filler. It's the bridge. It is everything. You don't trust anyone, and to have someone say, "I feel you," I didn't either. I get it. Someone who gives you permission to feel the way you feel. Someone who tells you that. So many stories of other women sharing theirs. I'm like, God, I thought I was a train wreck. If you were that big of a mess and you got your life together, then I'm all in.
Somebody to be able to say, I have been right where you are, and look how far that I've come.
Right, my life is totally different.
Yeah, it restores that hope that, oh, well, look what they've done with their life, and they were, where I am now, I can be there too.
And I don't want to say that clinicians and case managers, therapists, social workers don't have valuable roles. They all play really valuable roles in rebuilding a life. And that's not what I'm trying to say at all. But in order to trust a social worker, in order to trust a case manager, there has to be trust built somewhere. Yeah. And I think that's where a peer support is critical in building trust in a system that, sometimes it's burnt you. Sometimes you've had ill feelings for. Sometimes there's been law enforcement involvement or DCBS involvement, and you associate things. So, critical is my word.
Yeah, I feel like there's just such a negative view that there's a lot of stigma out there. So whenever you find that one person that has gone through, that understands what you went through, what you were feeling, why you made the choices that you did, but then also see that they overcome that, I think that that's just a huge relationship builder.
This role, it's a new job to even really be out there still. But, is it just going to take time passing on for people to really start accepting peer supports, into every facet of things? Or is that growing? Or what is that like?
I think all new concepts take some buy-in time. Yeah. We're seeing that with MOUD.
And that MOUD stands for Medications for Opioid Use Disorder.
For years, numbers have shown this to be effective and safe. It's taken me and my coworkers and our system as a whole, it's taken time to buy in. New concepts are scary. Changing things is scary. And we're asking some people to change core beliefs about addiction and recovery in order to accept this. So, I think time and interactions and open-mindedness.
Talking about it, I think the more the people talk about it, I think that that's going to shift over time.
I think breaking down those stigmas, like KaSandra said,
sure.
There's so much stigma in this world and doing this kind of work, and even with peer support, we all came into this field. Like I said, a lot of us had no prior experience. I think we all came in with a certain level of bias and stigma of our own. But then you meet people like Brittany, and you meet other peers who have really just transformed themselves personally, professionally, I mean, you name it. And what better way to break down the stigma than to see this literal success story and know that we can help somebody else do that exact same process.
I mean, and some of the stigma is just lack of education. So providing that education, you know, that addiction, you know, it changes the chemistry in the brain, and it takes, even, you know, after being clean, it still takes like, you know, years, up to 2 years for your brain to, you know, somewhat go back to normal. And I think it's just educating people on the physical changes, you know, the mental changes that chemicals do to you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. So after over 50 episodes for this show, this is the first time I've ever been asked a question like this. So what you are about to hear is my unedited response, and just so you can see how tripped up I got on being asked to consider this, even when it's my job to talk about this stuff.
Why controversial? So what is it about peer support that some people may find controversial?
I think I was about to ask a similar thing with, like, I'll answer. Yeah.
Okay.
You could, like, a caterpillar and a butterfly are like the same exact creature, and like it could be controversial to somebody to, like, if you look at somebody, you're like, oh, I've heard stories of what people are like you people, right, kind of thing, like that snarl on your face, and like it could be like you're finally meeting something face to face that you've heard about, that you've seen. Now you see TV shows depicting and everything, and like it's everywhere, and it's been blamed for a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And you're like, but then you're being forced to be face to face with somebody, and you're like, trust me. And then it just takes consistency, I think, too. And yeah, I don't know if that answers, does it?
Yeah, I mean,
kind of. I think it's controversial because, like, it's, I don't know, you hear bad things about people that are in addiction.
Yeah. Addiction causes harm. Mm-hmm. Let's not lie about that. It creates a lot of pain, and I think that's probably why it's so controversial, because it hurts so bad.
Yeah, and there's not one single person that can really say that they've not been touched in some form or fashion from addiction, you know, with family member, friends, or even like
coworkers.
Yeah, coworkers or knowing somebody. And I think that when you have that personal connection, like things happen where it kind of builds that stigma, like it burns a lot of bridges, even with you.
Absolutely.
And I think just, you know, finding that compassion and understanding, you know, where they're at, where they're, you know, that there is hope for them, that they just need that hope restored.
So let's get back to the main heart of what these guys are doing real quick, and that is they are trying to make it easier on people to re-enter society after being incarcerated. One, just like more tactical question I have is, how hard is it to like fix somebody's like social security card and birth certificate? That sounds like an awful process.
There's a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles, and the pandemic did not help any of that.
Oh, gosh, I believe that.
And let me tell you this, I'm a smart girl. I'm determined. Nothing stops me when I get my mind set to something. And I can't imagine feeling insecure, feeling doubtful about myself and my abilities, trying to navigate this system. And thank God that we have hired some brilliant, motivated, determined peer supports, because they're navigating the system with our people. COVID threw a wrench in everything that was challenging before. Yeah. So now we're talking about navigating these systems that are set up for in-person, face-to-face contact to prove your identity, to prove where you live. And now we're trying to do this over the phone and through mail, believe it or not, through mail to get these things done. And then getting denials and having to resubmit with new documentation to be re-denied because there was something inadequate about it. It's tough. And now we have regional offices for driver's licensing.
Yeah.
With higher standards of proof for your identity, which has only compounded issues with people without transportation and supports and resources.
Yeah. Do you guys do much with transportation? Because, I mean, that is just a huge thing, especially in this area, like with the whole...
I feel like transportation and housing are like the two things that's almost consistently checked with our inmates as a need, identified as a need.
Yeah,
is
housing
transportation
for sure.
and housing.
Housing for sure.
What's the housing solution that you guys look at?
Oh gosh, we're taking suggestions.
There isn't
Yeah.
any. I mean, there's no housing.
We need sober living homes. We need more sober living homes. Our two huge urban areas in Kentucky, Lexington and Louisville, have an abundance of resources for sober living and people reentering from incarceration. But our rural populations are suffering immensely with lack of housing. Yeah. And in order to get Section 8 or HUD, you've got long waiting lists, and you have to have your 3 major forms of identification. But we're going to release these people into the world with no support, no nothing, and expect all these things to fall in their lap. But that's not how things happen.
So where do people stay? Do they just have to find somewhere? I guess go back to...
Goes back to the revolving door. They have nowhere else to go.
Where they're comfortable.
Yeah.
Despite how unsafe, it's where they're the safest.
So I imagine it's pretty hard for you guys to be focusing on, like, it's like there are all these different areas of need and these huge problems, but like if you're going to do anything effective, you have to zero in. You guys, you have to focus in and focus on a specific one of those. You guys can't be expected to do every part of it.
No.
So
I mean,
I feel like at times we try though.
we do. Yeah, we have like this, this list of resources that we want to connect them with. And we have peers who, are full-time working on getting this done, but it's not just, Brittany and I as project director and project coordinator or our peers. It takes everybody in the community. It takes the law enforcement at the detention center. It takes the clerks at, the clerk's office, or the judges or the county attorneys, like all working together to kind of solve this solution. And we've navigated that. We've had meetings and kind of talked to them about our program. We have a really awesome, support in Mason County that we're working in, where the court system will now actually divert sentencing to comply with First Day Forward. So we have that support there. They're working daily with our peer, daily contact texting, like, hey, does this person qualify? They're doing status hearings to make sure that that person is in compliance with our program. So, I mean, it really takes everybody knowing about your programs and that support.
So I've got a couple questions that, one, I think is shorter. The other one may lead to some ranting. We'll see how this goes. But
Did you look at me?
I looked at every one of you. I made a
Okay.
Yeah. I like you, though. This is fun. Yeah. So, one problem I've heard, this is with a women's jail in, I think it was Montgomery County. They had trouble knowing when people are actually going to get released. How common is that across the board for what you guys see?
Very common. It's been an issue. They could be released really at any time.
Yeah.
I mean, you just never know.
Well, and when we were writing this, one of the other reasons, aside from lack of resources, that we chose county inmates as a target population was because they had expected out dates. Like, we knew they'd either get released at arraignment or be sentenced to 30, 60, 90 a year. They had for sure out dates that didn't waver because you didn't get work time. You didn't get good time. You were released on the day that your sentence was set to expire. But enter COVID and these 24-hour bonds and these ORs and these quick releases, and it's
what are the
really
ORs?
OR is own recognizance, where you sign yourself out saying, I promise to return on my court date, or I promise to comply.
And pinky swear.
Pinky
cross
swear.
Fingers,
Yeah.
whichever one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and generally, a lot of misdemeanors and prior criminal history wouldn't qualify you for being able to do that. But, I mean, that was all lowered so we could get people out of jail and make our jails safer for inmates.
Okay.
So it's really turned our project on its head, and we've had to pivot. And this is where communication with the jail was even more important than it was before. Just having communication, having allies within your jail staff, which is huge, right? They work 24-hour shifts. So, we really needed allies within the jail to get phone calls, who's getting released, who was let go after court, things like that.
So that's a really good transition into the next part. I'm going to preface this by saying that I do think that there's a lot on the plate of first responders and on people that run jails. That is a crazy job that I don't think I would do good at that job. I'm just curious to hear what your all's experience working with rural jails is, and navigating that, getting buy-in from it. What does good buy-in from the jail look like? What do you guys want to see when you're working with people on this, at least?
Some are more supportive than others.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, hold on. Going into this, I'm going to say, before you guys did interviews or anything, I dreaded this. I've lived in county jails, and I just knew that the atmosphere, I didn't see conduciveness to supportive programs. I didn't see open-mindedness. That being said, that was my expectations. So now you guys go ahead.
I think that needle is shifting. I think with education and just bringing awareness even to the staff, I think it's shifting. I think they're doing the best that they can to some extent, but I think that the pandemic has just really strained workforce in general, and like some of the detention centers that we work with, they are short staffed. So I mean, like at one point one of the detention centers hired 15 to 17 people at one time. Like imagine a detention center that's short that many officers. And I mean really it's just like, I don't know, they're just trying to do what they can.
They're trying to survive. Yeah. But I want to say, like, it's unfortunate that that's a situation. I feel like almost across the board that they're all in and they get out of and then they're back in. All our jailers were bought in. Mm-hmm. I think every single jailer that we met with said, we need more for these guys. Yeah. We need more for our people.
For our grant, we had to have a support or a letter of commitment. And each of the detention centers were all on board for that.
Yeah, they were really eager to put services in place. Unfortunately, it's just hard. I mean, they have a hard job. I mean, I don't care what your opinion on corrections or not correcting is. Like, that's a hard job. They deal with an abundance of very, very sick, very, very misguided, and also just lost people that are trapped in cages 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no encouragement, nothing bright, no sunshine.
I think in the short amount of time that we've been doing this too, we've started to see a shift. Like, all the jailers were on board, but a shift towards more of I guess just a recognition of this population and the special needs that they might have. Like, we recently met with a new jailer for the first time to talk about potentially bringing First Aid forward to his facility, and he was talking about all of the ways that, I mean, honestly, he goes out of his way to try and be an ally to the population who identify with a substance use disorder. And I think before, we wouldn't have found that as easily. I think that there has been, like KaSandra said, more education maybe, but a shift in thinking about addiction and recovery, even within those circles.
I mean, I feel like there's a need for education, especially for law enforcement jail staff. There's a need for education on ways to understand addiction, or ways to understand why the people are in there, why they keep coming back, just kind of understanding situations, as well as like how to deal with it. So how do you deal with somebody that has a mental health issue? Like, how much training do the jail staff actually get? Like, to what extent? So it needs to be, some sort of education, and it's definitely a need.
And that adds up with what we've heard from the jail episode as well. This training isn't necessarily a part of their job, or hasn't been in the past, but maybe it should be in the future. We've been seeing substance abuse get more attention from all kinds of fields, and maybe that should work its way into the jails now too. When did the understanding of addiction start changing to be, I guess, just more like compassionate than like war on drugs-ish?
I'll tell you what.
I'm not going to say election. That's not what I'm going to say.
I was just going to say, KaSandra mentioned earlier, there's nobody who doesn't have a tie to the substance use epidemic in Northeastern Kentucky. Like, there's nobody whose family is untouched by this in some capacity. And I think because it is such a widespread problem, and because people have started to have their siblings, their nieces, their nephews, I mean, whoever in their close families or very close friends have to battle this, it's starting to reframe their way of thinking. Like you were saying earlier, those people, the stigma attached to those who are, battling substance use disorder, they're starting to get names and faces associated to them. It's not just like those people anymore. It's, my brother, my sister, my cousin, whatever. There's nobody who doesn't have some sort of tie to this at this point.
For sure. And I think you can't, it'd be a perfect world if you could go out and teach everybody how to be compassionate. Like if I could teach you how to be compassionate, but you can't. But I think if we model it, I think people feel more comfortable saying, okay, I don't have to have this hard, one-sided opinion of this because she feels compassionate for these people and it's working. Like it makes me feel different.
Yeah.
I mean, I think kind of like what you mentioned earlier is people knew that it was a problem. They just kind of wanted to ignore it a little bit. So honestly, me and Kaleigh, we come from more of a healthcare education background, and we didn't do anything. So AHEC really is for healthcare workforce. So we go into schools and we get students interested in health careers. We get them, from the rural areas competitive for, college, going to medical school. And then once they're licensed, we do continuing education. So in 2017, I think it was, we did a CE over the power of prescribing. So that's really how we got involved. And there's a lot of discussion like, this is an issue. How do we as providers, how did we contribute to this? And a part of it was over-prescribing. So we started, diving into that and educating our providers on, MAT and how, the regulations, the guidelines, and kind of combating it that way. And then the more we got into it, we got into going into the detention centers. And now, here we are working in jail reentry.
Yeah.
So we've been in this since 2017.
And really, jail reentry and First Day Forward is only a part of what our coalition does. I mean, like KaSandra mentioned, we do continuing education events. We do youth prevention in schools for students, high school and late middle school. We do, right now we're working on an MAT mentorship program where we pair up people who are interested in prescribing for MAT with a seasoned provider so they can start doing it in their own practice. We've started a video series online because of the pandemic. We couldn't do these big in-person events like we had planned, so we started a virtual video series where they can do continuing education at their own pace. It's so multifaceted across all of our projects, what we do, but First Day Forward is such a massive component.
Yeah. I mean, and all these little things that Kaleigh's mentioning came from a planning grant that we did. So, I mean, you asked us whenever we went to the detention center, what was the most common thing? It was they didn't have resources, but it was also that they started using at a very, very young age. Most of them, like, under 10 years old. So, I mean, honestly, we decided to do a youth prevention where we go into the schools. So some of our grants, we go into the middle schools. For this grant particularly, we wanted to target 9th grade freshmen who are transitioning from middle school into high school, so they're more susceptible to that, that peer pressure. So every component that we have is a part of the outcomes that we learn from people incarcerated.
Which that's by the textbook, right? To like base what you do off of what you hear is the yeah. I don't know how often that.
The average age that we heard in those interviews was like 13, I think, that they started using at 13.
Those, people that said that they started using it at a young age got it from a parent.
And parents often encouraged.
It's it's kind of like a rural area thing too, because like if there's nothing to do in your community, what are they going to do? They're going to sit around and they're going to do what they're used to doing or what their other generations have done.
Well, and it goes back to stigma too. I mean, there's such a stigma surrounding mental health and behavioral health, and especially in rural communities. And this might be just speaking from experience. Like, mental health isn't really talked about, and so what do we do to numb our pain? Well, we use these different substances, and so it really is such a generational cyclical problem.
And this has just been a slew of some of the issues around this area of work, and it shows a lot of need. Let's look at where First Day Forward is right now as of June of 2022.
We've been in Clark County for almost 2 years now. So we're in Clark, Mason, Montgomery County. We have had 108 people in the First Day Forward, and within that we have helped 29 people go into treatment. So, as she kind of went through the process that, as soon as they're, released, we want them to start connecting them to all those resources. But in doing this, we realized that this step is that treatment and getting that, that education that they need, finding that hope, getting, those connections. And then whenever they're out of treatment, then that's whenever they need the resources. So, the process is a little longer than what we thought, but that's okay. That's good. That's 29 people that we've connected to treatment, that we are, changing lives, and then are going to connect them to the resources they need whenever they're done.
And that's not including driver's license, social security card, birth certificates, housing, transportation, education, employment, all the other things.
We were talking this morning in a meeting that, you see 108, and of those 108, 29 went to treatment. And some people might say, only 29. If you're just looking at the metrics, that's probably not a good average. That's probably not, it doesn't seem like a lot. But if you think of each of those 29 people as somebody that those are 29 lives that we've helped. And not only that, but the ripple effects that those 29 lives have, their friends, their family, their coworkers. You're not just helping that person, you're helping to break generational trauma a lot of the time, and generational drug abuse. And it's so much more than just that individual person.
And to reinforce that statement, we have an old clip from Will Arvin, who at the time was a peer support specialist for addiction recovery care.
One addict getting into recovery, there's no telling the circle of influence that one person has, maybe 10, 20, in a weekend that you get to brush shoulders with. So what goes on after that, then people are going to go and they're going to have a circle of influence.
So that is some very hopeful growth. And what counties are we looking at?
So right now we have First Day Forward in Clark, Mason, Montgomery. We will be in Powell County this fall, and we have applications out right now that could potentially be bringing First Day Forward to Carter, Greenup, and Boyd. So really our plan was every detention center within our 18 county service region to bring them First Day Forward. So we're working on it.
And we'll be hoping it goes well and helping in any way that we can. Well, this has been an extended version of this episode as well. Thank you all for sticking with us through the whole thing. These three ladies have a really up-close perspective on a lot of the issues faced around this whole field. So a big thanks to them for coming onto the show and talking about what they've experienced so far. And would also like to thank WSKV for broadcasting the show and the Powell County Health Department in Kentucky Rio for sponsoring us. This is The Local Lens. These are our people using our voices, telling our stories, because no one sees it like we do.